The coffee machine started before the house did. A soft click, then the low, steady hum. I stood there, waiting for it to finish, like I always did. The kitchen light was still off. Only the small glow from the machine and the clock above the stove. 6:12. I didn't turn anything else on. The house felt easier before it woke up. I reached for a mug from the same spot on the shelf. Second row, left side. It had a small chip near the rim that my finger always found before I lifted it. I set it under the machine, watched the coffee pour. Dark first, then lighter as the cup filled. Steam rose slowly into the quiet. I didn't move until it stopped. Then I took the mug and held it in both hands. Warm. I didn't drink it. I set it down on the counter next to the sink. The fridge door opened with a soft pull. Light spilled out across the floor and up the cabinets. Lunchbox on the second shelf. I took it out and placed it on the counter without closing the door right away. Cold air moved around my arm. I stood there looking inside like I was checking something I had already checked. Then I closed it. The latch clicked a little louder than everything else. I opened the drawer for the small containers, the ones with the blue lids. One was missing. I paused with my hand still inside the drawer before pulling it back out and reaching into the dishwasher instead. It had already run sometime during the night. I opened it, and a wave of heat came out against my face. Plates stacked clean, glasses lined in rows. I reached in and took the container from the top rack, set it on the counter next to the lunchbox. Didn't close the dishwasher. I would come back to it. I always did. The house stayed quiet around me. No footsteps, no voices, just the low hum of things already working. I moved between them without thinking. Bread out, knife, peanut butter. The lid twisted open with a soft pull. I spread it evenly, edge to edge, cut the sandwich without looking down. Wrapped it, placed it inside the lunchbox. My phone lit up on the counter. A notification. School app. Something about a form due this week. I didn't open it, just saw it and let the screen go dark again. I would remember. From somewhere down the hall, a voice called out, "Mom?" I turned my head before I answered. "Yeah?" No reply right away, then, "Where's my blue folder?" I looked toward the hallway, even though I couldn't see him. "Check your backpack." A pause, then footsteps moving away again. I turned back to the counter, finished closing the lunchbox, zipped it, set it near the edge so it would be seen on the way out. The coffee was still there. Steam had thinned, the surface barely moving now. I picked it up again for a second, like I might drink it, then set it back down in the same place. My hand stayed on the handle, then let go. I moved to the sink, turned the water on just enough to rinse the knife. The sound filled the space between everything else. I set the knife down on the rack without drying it. Behind me, a door opened. Light shifted in the hallway. More footsteps. Faster this time. "Mom?" "I know," I said before the sentence finished. Shoes by the door. A small silence. Then movement again. The day was starting to form around me, piece by piece. I reached for the dish towel hanging from the oven handle, folded it once over my hand, pressed it lightly against the counter where a drop of water had spread, flat against the surface. I didn't move it right away. The coffee sat behind me, untouched. The house continued waking up, and I was already inside it before anyone needed anything. No one asked me to. The dishwasher was still open when I came back to it. Heat had faded, but the inside was still warm. I stood there, looking at the rows like I was deciding where to begin, the space inside getting wider with each piece. The kitchen stayed quiet, except for the small sounds of glass touching wood. My phone lit up again. Another notification. Piano at 4:30. Soccer at 6. I didn't pick it up, just read it from where I stood and let the screen dim on its own. I would remember. I always did. I slid the top rack back in and reached for the bottom. I closed the cabinet with my hip. Not fully. It stayed slightly open. I noticed it, but didn't fix it yet. The trash can near the corner was almost full. The lid didn't close all the way anymore. I stood there looking at it, then reached down and pressed the top just enough to make it sit flat again. It didn't hold. It lifted back a few inches. I opened the cabinet under the sink and pulled out a new bag. The roll turned once in my hand before I tore it free. I tied the full bag closed without tightening it too much, lifted it out and held it there for a second before moving toward the door. The back door opened with a small pull. Cool air came in against my face. I stepped outside just long enough to drop the bag into the bin. Didn't look around. Came back in and closed the door with my foot. The kitchen looked the same as before, just lighter by one thing no one had noticed yet. I placed the new bag into the trash can and folded the edges over the rim. Smoothed it down with both hands. My palms stayed there a moment longer than needed. Then I pulled them away. The cabinet door above the sink was still slightly open. I reached up and pushed it closed with 2 fingers. It clicked softly. My phone lit up again. I didn't open it, just watched the preview fade away. The coffee was still on the counter. No steam now. The surface completely still. I picked it up and brought it closer to my face. Smelled it. Didn't drink. I set it down again a few inches from where it had been. Like that changed anything. Footsteps moved through the hallway again. Faster now. Drawers opening, closing. Mom? I turned slightly. Yeah? Do I need a jacket? I looked toward the door where the light was starting to shift. Take one. A pause. Okay. More movement. Then quiet again. I moved to the counter and picked up the lunchbox. Checked the zipper even though I had already closed it. Pressed along the edge just to feel it hold. Set it back down. The house was filling in around me now. Not loud, just occupied. I wiped the counter again with the dish towel, even though it was already dry. The fabric moved in small circles, slow, careful. Nothing changed when I finished. From the living room, the TV turned on, a low voice reading the morning news. I didn't turn to look. I knew where everything was without seeing it. I folded the dish towel once, then again, and placed it back on the oven handle. Straightened the edge so it hung evenly. My hand stayed there for a second, resting against the fabric. Then I let it drop. No one said my name, not once. The morning moved forward anyway. The TV was already on when I stepped into the living room. Low volume, Morning voices. A weather map moving slowly across the screen. He was sitting in the same spot on the couch, laptop open on his knees, one hand on the keyboard, the other resting near the trackpad. He didn't look up when I walked in. I stood there for a second, like I was deciding if I needed to say something, then didn't. I moved past him toward the hallway. The carpet felt softer in the morning, less worn before the day pressed into it. Behind me, I heard the small sound of typing, then the pause between messages, then typing again. "Morning," he said, not turning. "Morning," I answered. I kept walking. The bedroom door was half open. I pushed it wider with my hand and stepped inside. The bed was unmade on his side, sheets pulled back just enough to show where he had gotten up, my side still smooth. I picked up the edge of the blanket and pulled it straight without thinking, not fully making the bed, just enough. I moved to the closet. One of his shirts hung slightly out of line with the others. I reached in and adjusted it, shifted it back so the row looked even again. My hand stayed there on the fabric a second longer before I let go. From the living room, I could still hear the TV. A different voice now. Something about traffic. I stepped back into the hallway. The house felt fuller than it had earlier. Not louder, just occupied. In the kitchen, I passed the counter without stopping. The coffee was still there. Darker now. Colder. I didn't pick it up this time. From the front door, I heard movement. Zipper. Shoes. "Mom, I'm leaving." I turned slightly toward the sound. "Okay." The door opened, closed. A pause as the lock clicked. Then nothing. I stood there, then moved again, back into the living room. He shifted slightly on the couch as I passed behind him, adjusted the laptop on his legs. The screen reflected faintly on his face. Emails. Rows of them. "I've got a long day," he said, still looking at the screen. "I might be late." I nodded before realizing he couldn't see it. "Okay." He didn't respond, didn't turn. His fingers moved again across the keyboard. I stood there just behind the couch for a second, like I might say something else. My mouth opened slightly, then closed. I looked at the back of his chair instead, at the seam running down the middle, a loose thread near the edge. I reached out and pressed it flat with my finger, then pulled my hand back. From the kitchen, the sink made a small sound, a drop of water falling into metal. I turned toward it without thinking, moved back across the room. The house pulled me where it needed me before I decided where to go. I picked up the mug from the counter and carried it to the sink, poured the coffee out. It ran dark, then lighter as it thinned, swirled once before disappearing down the drain. I rinsed the mug under the tap, set it upside down on the rack. The counter was already clean. There was nothing left to adjust. From the living room, he shifted again, closed the laptop halfway, not fully. "I'll grab something on the way," he said. "Don't worry about dinner." I stood at the sink with my hands resting on the edge. "Okay," I said. The word felt smaller than the space around it. He didn't say anything else. The TV kept talking. Cars, weather, time. I dried my hands on the dish towel and folded it back over the handle. Straightened the edge without looking down. Behind me, the couch creaked slightly as he stood up. Footsteps crossing the room. Keys picked up from the table. A pause near the door. Then it opened. closed. Silence returned in pieces, not all at once. I stayed where I was for a moment, hands resting lightly on the counter. The house felt the same. Nothing missing, nothing wrong. Everything still in place, and somehow there was nothing in it that needed me. The grocery list was already started on the counter, a piece of paper folded once down the middle. I opened it and smoothed it flat with my palm. Milk, eggs, bread. The same 3 things at the top every time. I added yogurt underneath in smaller writing to fit the space. My hand paused with the pen just above the paper, like there was something else I should remember. Then I set it down without adding anything more. The fridge opened again, light across the shelves. I moved things slightly to see what was behind them, even though I already knew. A container pushed back to the second row. I pulled it forward just enough to see inside. Leftovers from 2 nights ago, still sealed. I held it there a moment longer before placing it back in the same spot. The door stayed open longer than needed, cold air moving against my arm. Then I closed it. The latch clicked. I reached for the pantry door and pulled it open. Boxes lined up in rows. Cereal, crackers, snacks. One box slightly turned out of place. I straightened it so the front faced forward. My hand stayed there against the cardboard for a second before I pulled it away. From the hallway, I heard the washing machine shift into the next cycle. A low thud, then the steady turning of water and fabric. I walked toward it without thinking. The laundry room door was half open. I pushed it wider with my shoulder. The machine was already running, clothes pressing against the glass, then falling away again. I stood there, watching it, complete a full turn. Then another. The rhythm was steady, predictable. I reached for the basket on the floor and picked up a shirt from the top. Folded it, even though it didn't need folding yet. Set it back down. My hand rested on the edge of the basket a second longer before I stepped back. The trash can in the kitchen was empty now, the new bag smooth against the sides. No one had touched it. No one had seen the one before it. I picked up the grocery list and folded it again along the same line. Pressed the crease with my thumb to make it sharper. My phone lit up on the counter. I didn't open it, just watched as the preview disappeared and the screen went dark. The house felt settled again. Everything in its place. Everything handled before it needed to be. I walked to the sink and turned the faucet on just enough to rinse my hands, even though they weren't dirty. The water ran over my fingers and into the metal basin with a soft, steady sound. I kept them there a second longer than needed, then turned it off. From the living room, the TV had switched to something else. Voices, but no words I followed. Just sound. I dried my hands on the dish towel and left it slightly uneven this time on the handle. I noticed it. Didn't fix it. The grocery list sat on the counter near the edge, ready to be taken, ready to be used. Before I picked it up, I looked around the kitchen once more. Counter clear. Sink empty. Trash reset. Nothing waiting. Nothing undone. I stood there with the list in my hand and nowhere specific to go next. From the back of the house, the washing machine shifted again. Another cycle, another turn. The same movement repeating without needing to be told. I folded the list one more time, smaller now, so it fit in my hand. Held it there a second longer before slipping it into my pocket. The house stayed quiet. Everything already taken care of. Before anyone had to notice. The line of cars curved around the school and stopped before the corner. Brake lights, one after another. Red, then darker, as the sun shifted behind the trees. I pulled in and stopped where the line stopped. Put the car in park. The engine stayed on, a low, steady vibration under my hands. The air inside was still. My phone sat in the cup holder. The screen lit up once, then dimmed again before I picked it up. I didn't reach for it. I looked through the windshield at the cars ahead. No one moved. A door opened 2 cars up, closed again, then nothing. In the back seat, he started talking. Something about school, a teacher, a game. His voice filling the space behind me. I nodded once without turning. Mm-hmm. He kept going, words moving faster than I followed. I adjusted my hands on the steering wheel. Right hand slid slightly higher, left stayed where it was. The engine hummed. A car pulled forward 3 spaces ahead. The line didn't follow yet. I watched the gap open, then sit there. Behind me, his voice paused. Did you hear me? I blinked and looked into the mirror. I did, I said. What did I say? I held his eyes in the reflection for a second longer than needed. Something about your teacher. A pause. Then he nodded and looked down at something in his hands. The space inside the car settled again. I looked forward. The line moved 1 car length. I shifted into drive and eased forward. Stopped again. The coffee sat in the cup holder beside my phone, the lid still on. I reached for it and lifted it slightly. Felt the weight. Not as warm now. I turned it once in my hand like I might open it, then set it back down without drinking. My hand stayed resting on the lid a moment longer, then moved away. A teacher walked along the sidewalk, waving a group forward. Doors opened, closed. Backpacks swung over shoulders. Voices outside rose and fell in short bursts. Inside the car, it stayed quiet. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. 3:47. The minute changed as I watched it. 3:48. The car ahead rolled forward again. I followed. Stopped. Behind me, a car door slammed somewhere farther back. The sound carried, then disappeared. In the rearview mirror, I could see him leaning slightly toward the window, watching something I couldn't see from where I sat. His reflection shifted, then stilled. I adjusted my grip on the wheel again, fingers tightening, then relaxing. The engine never changed. Same low sound holding everything together. The line moved 2 more cars. I followed. Stopped. A space opened ahead of me and stayed open for a second longer than it should have. I didn't move right away, then eased forward to close it. Park again. The coffee sat untouched. The phone stayed dark. No new messages. No missed calls. Just the quiet of things already in place. A teacher stepped closer to my window and motioned forward. I nodded and pulled ahead to the curb. The door behind me opened. Closed. Bye, he said, already halfway out. Bye, I answered. The door shut, a small thud that settled quickly. I stayed there after he was gone, hands still on the wheel, the engine running, no one speaking. The car empty, but not quiet, just still. I looked at the seat behind me, strap slightly twisted, a jacket left half folded against the corner. I reached back and straightened it. My hand stayed there on the fabric a second longer before I pulled it forward again. I shifted into drive, pulled away from the curb. The line behind me closed the space I had been in, like it had never been there. Dinner didn't start with anyone asking what to eat. It just happened. The kitchen light was already on when I walked in, a soft yellow settling over the counter. I opened the fridge and looked inside without reaching for anything. Containers shifted when I moved one forward, another behind it. A lid lifted, then set back down without opening it. I closed the door and stood there for a second longer than needed, then turned and reached for a pan. The cabinet opened with a quiet pull. I took it out and set it on the stove in the center, like it had a place it always went. The burner clicked once, twice, then lit. A small blue flame holding steady. I poured oil without measuring, watched it spread to the edges. From the living room, the TV was already on. A different show now. Laughter from somewhere off screen. He was there. I didn't look. I knew where he sat. I moved between the counter and the stove without thinking. Cutting, placing, turning. The same motions. A drawer opened, closed. The sound of utensils light against each other. From the couch, his voice came through between the TV noise. "What are we having?" I didn't turn. "Chicken," I said. A pause. "Okay." The TV got louder for a moment, then settled again. I flipped the pieces in the pan. They moved easily, then stayed where they landed. Steam rose into the air above them. I reached for the salt without looking, sprinkled it evenly across the surface. My hand stayed above the pan a second longer before pulling back. The timer on the stove wasn't set, but I knew how long it had been. I always did. Plates came out before the food was done, set on the table in the same places. Forks to the left, knives to the right. I adjusted one slightly so it lined up with the edge. From the living room, the show shifted again. Another laugh track. He didn't come in. I finished cooking without checking the time, turned the burner off, moved the pan to the side. The flame disappeared, but the heat stayed. I carried the food to the table and set it down in the center. Didn't call anyone. They came when they came. He walked in a minute later, sat down in the same chair. Didn't look at the table before picking up his fork. "Smells good," he said, not looking at me. "Thanks," I answered. I stayed standing, then sat. Not fully, just at the edge of the chair. He started eating. TV still playing in the other room. Sound carrying into the kitchen. I took a bite after he had already started, then stood up again. Water. I reached for a glass from the cabinet and filled it halfway, set it next to his plate. He nodded once without looking up. He finished eating before I did, set his fork down on the plate, and leaned back slightly. The chair made a small sound against the floor. "Long day," he said. I nodded. "Yeah." He picked up his phone, scrolled, didn't look at me. I took another bite. He stood up before I finished, picked up his phone and turned toward the living room, left the plate on the table, still half full. I watched it for a second longer than needed, then reached forward and picked it up. The fork shifted slightly against the surface as I lifted it. I carried it to the sink, set it down next to mine. The sound was softer than I expected. Behind me, the TV got louder. A new scene, more voices. I stood there with my hands resting on the edge of the sink. Water not running yet. The kitchen felt still again. The table half cleared. The chair slightly pushed back. From the living room, his voice came again, casual like everything else. "You're home anyway." It landed in the space between the rooms. Didn't echo. Didn't change anything in the way things moved. I didn't turn. My hands stayed where they were, flat against the counter. The room was smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just quieter in a different way. A folding table near the wall, 2 chairs on each side, a whiteboard with something half erased. A few people were already sitting, not talking much, just waiting. One of them looked up when I sat down, gave a small smile. I nodded once, then looked away. My hands rested on the table flat for a second before I folded them together. The chair felt unfamiliar under me, not uncomfortable, just not mine. Someone at the front started speaking. I didn't look up right away, just listened to the rhythm of their voice before the words settled into meaning. I reached for the pen near my notebook. A question was asked, not directed at anyone, just open. The room stayed quiet for a moment, long enough that it could have ended there. Then someone spoke, then another. I looked up just as the conversation started moving, ideas passing from one person to the next, building slightly, then shifting again. I followed it without speaking. My hand rested on the notebook without opening it, the pen still between my fingers. Another pause, a gap between voices, small but there. I heard myself before I decided to speak. A few words, nothing long, just enough to fill the space. The room shifted slightly when I finished. Not visibly, just enough. Someone across the table looked at me, held my gaze a second longer than needed. "I like how you think," she said. Simple, not emphasized, just said. I nodded, didn't answer right away. My hand tightened slightly around the pen, then loosened. "Thanks," I said. The word felt unfamiliar in my mouth, like it had been waiting somewhere I hadn't used in a while. The conversation moved on, different topic, different voices. I sat there with my hands still on the table, the notebook still closed, the pen still in my hand. I didn't add anything else. Didn't need to. The room kept moving without me. But it had paused for me once. When it ended, I stood up at the same time as everyone else. Chairs shifted back, bags lifted. Quiet conversations started in pieces around the room. I picked up my bag from the floor. The strap slid into place on my shoulder without adjustment, like it had been waiting there. I walked out into the hallway. The light was brighter here. Voices carried from farther away. Someone passed me and said something I didn't catch. I nodded anyway. Outside, the air felt different, cooler, less contained. I stood just outside the door for a moment, not moving yet, my hand resting lightly on the strap near my shoulder. "I like how you think." The words stayed with me longer than they should have. I didn't repeat them, didn't say them again in my head. They just stayed. I walked to the car and opened the door, sat down, closed it. The space inside felt familiar again. The seat, the wheel, the quiet. I placed my bag on the passenger seat. It folded slightly toward the center. I didn't fix it. I sat there with my hands resting in my lap, not reaching for the keys yet, not starting the engine, just sitting. The silence felt different here, not empty, just waiting. I looked at my hands for a second longer than needed, then reached forward and started the car. The store was quieter than I expected, not empty, just spread out. Carts moving slowly down wide aisles. soft music somewhere overhead that didn't belong to anything I was doing. I took a cart from the front and pushed it forward until it rolled on its own, then followed it. The grocery list sat folded in my pocket. I didn't take it out. I knew what was on it. I always did. Produce first. The same turn into the same aisle, green stacked next to green. I reached for apples without looking at the price, placed them into the cart, one by one. They settled against each other with a soft, hollow sound. I moved forward. Milk at the back, eggs near the end, bread along the wall. My hands moving ahead of me before I decided what to take. The cart filled slowly with things that always belonged there. Nothing new, nothing missing. I turned into the next aisle without thinking. Boxes lined up in straight rows, colors facing forward, everything already arranged to be chosen. My hand stayed there against the edge of the box a second longer before I let go. I moved further down the aisle, slower now. The cartwheels made a soft sound against the floor. Even, predictable. I stopped near the middle. Something on the shelf caught my hand before it caught my attention. I picked it up. Not on the list. Not something we needed. Just there. I held it in both hands for a moment, the weight of it resting in my palms. I looked at the price, then back at the object. My fingers adjusted slightly around the edges, like I was about to place it into the cart. I didn't. I stayed there, holding it. The aisle moved around me. A cart passed behind me. Someone reached for something 2 shelves down. I didn't turn. The object remained in my hands. Not chosen, not put back, just held. I looked at it again, then lowered it slowly back to the shelf, placed it exactly where it had been, adjusted it so it lined up with the others. My hand rested there against the row a moment longer, then dropped. I stood there with the cart still in front of me, not moving yet, the list still in my pocket. Everything I needed already in the cart. Everything else left where it was. I pushed forward again after a pause that lasted a second longer than it should have. The wheels turned without resistance. I moved to the next aisle and didn't look back. At checkout, I placed each item on the belt in the same order they would go back into the cart. Milk first, then eggs, then everything else fitting in around them. The scanner beeped once for each item, a steady rhythm. The total appeared before I looked at it. I reached for my card, held it just above the machine, not touching it yet, the screen waiting. My hand stayed there a second longer than needed. Then I tapped it. A soft confirmation. The screen changed. Approved. I pulled the card back and held it in my hand for a moment before putting it away. The receipt printed in a thin line curling at the edge. I tore it off without reading it, folded it once, placed it in my pocket next to the list. The cart rolled forward on its own as I pushed it toward the exit. The doors opened before I reached them. Air shifted around me. Cooler outside. Brighter. I didn't stop, just kept moving with the cart until I reached the car. I opened the trunk and placed the bags inside, one by one, each one settling into the space it always fit. Nothing out of place, nothing extra. When it was done, I closed the trunk and stood there for a second longer than needed, then got into the car. The car stayed quiet after the door closed, not silent, just held. I placed the keys in the cup holder instead of the ignition. My bag sat on the passenger seat, folded slightly toward me. The strap curled inward like it had settled there on its own. I didn't move it. My phone lit up once, then again. A small vibration against the plastic. I picked it up and looked at the screen. An email. No subject I recognized right away, just my name at the top like it belonged there. I opened it. The screen shifted. White background, black text. A date near the top from years ago. I didn't scroll, just held the phone in front of me and let my eyes adjust to what was already visible. A sentence halfway down that I didn't need to read twice. Something about a role, about starting, about a time I had said yes without pausing. My thumb hovered near the screen like I might scroll further down. It didn't move. The car stayed still around me. No engine, no sound except the faint hum from somewhere outside. I looked at the date again, then at the line below it. The words didn't change when I looked longer. They stayed exactly where they were. I lowered the phone slightly, but didn't close it. My eyes moved to the steering wheel in front of me, hands resting lightly on my lap. The email still open, still there, like it had been waiting somewhere I hadn't checked in a long time. I lifted the phone again, just enough to bring it back into focus. Didn't scroll, didn't reply, didn't close it, just looked. My hand tightened slightly around the edge, then loosened. I pressed the lock button without thinking. The screen went dark, my reflection faintly visible for a second before it disappeared. I set the phone back into the cup holder next to the keys. It tilted slightly against them, then settled. I looked forward through the windshield. The parking lot moved slowly around me. Cars pulling out, pulling in. People crossing between rows without looking up. Nothing stopped for long. Nothing stayed in one place. My bag on the seat shifted slightly when I leaned forward, the zipper half open. I reached over and pulled it closed in one smooth motion. The sound was soft, quick, final. My hand stayed on the top of the bag a second longer than needed, then moved away. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine started without hesitation, a low hum filling the space that had been quiet. I didn't shift into drive right away, just sat there with the engine running and both hands resting lightly on the wheel. The email was still there, somewhere just behind the screen, unchanged, unanswered. I looked straight ahead for a moment longer than needed, then put the car into drive and pulled out of the space. The sink was already full when I walked in. Not overflowing, just waiting. Plates stacked at an angle, one bowl tilted inside another, a glass near the edge with a small line of water at the bottom. I stood there without touching anything. The kitchen light felt brighter at night, sharper against the counter. The rest of the house was quieter now. TV still on in the other room, but lower, more distant. I reached for the dish towel on the oven handle, unfolded it once, then again, held it in both hands without moving, the fabric resting against my fingers, soft from being used over and over. I set it down next to the sink, not hanging, just placed. The faucet handle turned with a small click. Water started in a steady stream, not too strong, just enough. I picked up a plate, held it under the water without scrubbing, watched the surface darken, then clear again. My hands didn't move right away, just held it there a second longer than needed, then set it down back into the sink. Not washed, just moved. The water kept running. I didn't reach for the sponge, didn't reach for the soap. I stood there with my hands resting on the edge of the counter, the sound of the water filling the space between everything else. From the living room, a voice rose, then faded again. A laugh track that didn't belong to anything in this room. I looked at the sink, at the plates waiting in the same position. Nothing changed. Nothing moved unless I moved it. My hand reached for the dish towel again, stopped halfway, hovered just above it, then lowered back to the counter without picking it up. The water kept running, steady, uninterrupted. I turned my head slightly toward the hallway without stepping away. No one called. No one asked. No one came in. The kitchen stayed exactly as it was. My hands still on the edge. The towel still where I left it. The sink still full. The water still running. I looked down at my hands, then turned the faucet off. The sound stopped all at once. Silence didn't rush in. It just appeared. I picked up the towel and held it in both hands again. Didn't use it, just held it. Then set it back down in the same place, flat against the counter. I didn't move anything else, didn't touch the plates, didn't finish what I had started. I stepped back from the sink. Just one step, then another. The kitchen stayed behind me exactly the same. Nothing fixed, nothing worse, just there, waiting. And for the first time, I didn't move to meet it. The morning didn't change. The coffee machine started at the same time, the same click, the same hum. I stood there and watched it finish. Poured the coffee into the same mug, set it on the counter. Didn't drink it. The lunchbox was still on the shelf inside the fridge. I saw it when I opened the door. Left it there. Closed the fridge without taking it out. The light went off behind the door, like it always did. My phone lit up. A reminder I had set before. School. Time. I looked at it for a second, then set the phone down without opening anything. From the hallway, a voice called out, "Mom!" I turned my head. "Yeah? Where's my lunch?" I stood still next to the counter, my hand resting lightly on the edge. "In the fridge," I said. A pause. "It's not packed." Another pause, longer this time. I looked at the mug on the counter, the surface barely moving. "Take something quick," I said, my voice even, flat. Footsteps moved faster now, cabinet doors opening, closing. A drawer pulled out, then pushed back too quickly. From the living room, his voice came through. "What's going on?" "He didn't pack lunch," I said. A small silence followed, then movement. He stood up, walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, looked inside like it would tell him what to do. He took out the lunchbox, set it on the counter, opened it. Empty. He paused with his hand resting on the lid, then reached for the bread. The same place. He made the sandwich without looking at me. Slower than I would have. Less even. Peanut butter not spread to the edges. He closed it, wrapped it, put it inside. The zipper caught once before closing. He pushed it shut with more force than needed. "There," he said. Not to me, just into the room. The lunchbox sat on the counter, slightly off-center. He picked it up and handed it over without turning fully. Footsteps moved back toward the door. Shoes, zipper. A quick, "Bye," already halfway gone. The door opened, closed. The lock clicked. The house settled again in small pieces. He stood there for a moment longer than needed, looking at the counter, at the bread still out, at the knife left beside it. Then he reached for the knife, rinsed it quickly under the tap, set it down without drying it. He didn't say anything, didn't look at me, just moved back toward the living room. The TV turned on again, same volume, same distance. I stayed where I was, my hands still resting lightly on the counter. Nothing in front of me that needed to be done. The coffee still untouched. The counter still clear. The sink still holding what I had left there the night before. Everything slightly out of place, just not held the way it used to be. I reached for the mug, picked it up, held it for a second, then set it back down in the same place. My hand stayed on the handle a moment longer before letting go. The house kept moving, without waiting for me to move with it. The house was quiet before it became still. Not all at once, just piece by piece. The TV had been turned off at some point without me noticing when. The hallway light was still on, a soft line of yellow stretching across the floor into the living room. I walked through it without turning it off. The couch held the shape of where he had been, a slight dip in the cushion that hadn't lifted yet. I sat down on the far edge, not in the center, not where the fabric was worn in. My hands rested in my lap. No phone, no remote, nothing to hold. The room stayed as it was, nothing asking to be changed. From the kitchen, the dishwasher started on its own, a low hum, then the steady rush of water behind the door. I didn't get up to check it. I knew what it was doing, the same cycle it always ran, the same sound filling the same space. I leaned back slightly against the couch, not fully, just enough to feel the support without settling into it. The cushion shifted under me, then stopped. My eyes moved across the room without landing anywhere. The table clear, the chair slightly out of place. I saw it, didn't fix it. My hands stayed in my lap, fingers resting against each other without moving. From the hallway, a small shadow shifted as something outside passed by the window. Then it was gone. The house returned to its own shape. I looked toward the kitchen without standing up. The light still on, the counter clean, the sink not empty, just left. Something small near the edge, slightly out of line. I saw it, paused. My body leaned forward just a little, then stopped. I sat back again. The dishwasher kept running, water moving behind a closed door, doing what it always did without being told. I stayed where I was. No list, no reminder, no next thing waiting in front of me. The space didn't change. It didn't need me to adjust it. It didn't ask to be finished. I looked down at my hands, then lifted my head and looked forward again. Just still. And for the first time, I didn't move to meet it.